Hey, now my microphone's probably working. This camera's all messed up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hi, YouTubes. Shout out to my buddy Ronald Jenkins there. Hey, YouTubes. Gotta love that guy. Um, we're gonna do a little bit of story time tonight, and kind of playing around with the setup here a little bit, getting this all pulled together. So I'm looking at my computer, checking my monitors, trying to keep up with this. The first thing I want to do is drop into live chat on Discord, so y'all can hang out with me if you want. Poke, poke, nudge, nudge. That's a thing. Hey, let me grab a hold of you here and. Hey, there we go. There we go. Well, that's better. Okay. Andrew Cole over there in the YouTube chat. USNVA. Gary White. How you doing, buddy? Over there in the YouTube chat. 4 people watching. Hello. Pretty simple tonight. I just want to take a quick second and read for you guys one of my favorite stories and officially kick off the storytelling part of our live streaming experience here on Tipsy Raven. So making a couple modifications to set up. I'm going to center myself on the frame. That's important. let me make sure that looks good. There we go. Okay, that looks good. So we're doing a reading from this book here. This is the Scottish Fairy Tales. Let me square this all up for you guys here. So this is Scottish Fairy Tales, and who's the author? No clue. There's literally there's no author. Who the fuck wrote it? So Le Monde Books published this, and this is one of my favorite books. I've abused it quite a bit reading it, and what we're going to do tonight is we're actually going to read a story about Thomas the Truth Teller. All right, it's down there. It's down there in that the thing. You see the thing down there? It tells you we're doing Thomas the Truth Teller tonight. But like all things Scottish, one is not enough. He's also known as Thomas the Rhymer, Thomas the Philosopher, Thomas Truth-Telling Tom, Honest Tom. He's got a bunch of nicknames because one's never enough, which I really won't hold that against him. So we have Scottish fairy tales, and I'm going to read for you guys Thomas the Truth Teller, and I'm going to inject some commentary here as we go. We got a whole bunch of stories to read. Some of these I actually have not read personally. I got my go-to stories that I check out. So this should be super good. I want a highly detailed map of my county with rivers, canals, streams, roads, interstates, railroads, etc. You need to go visit your county office and get a topological map, because that should all be on the topological. There's a couple of really cool pieces of art. There's only one for Thomas. I believe there's only there's 2 for Thomas. So we're going to use the top-down view for that, and I'm just going to read this for you guys. So I'll try to make this work good. We got a little bit of time here before my buddy's stream goes live, so we're going to try to wrap this up quickly because we got a late start on this. But hopefully you guys enjoy Thomas the Rhymer, Thomas the Truth Teller. What name do we want to give him today? Of all the young gallants in Scotland in the 13th century, there were none more gracious and debonair than Thomas Lermont, Laird of the Castle of Echleodorn in Berkshire. You're not allowed to give me a hard time about my Scottish accent. I don't have one. He loved books, poetry, and music, which were all uncommon tastes in those days, and, above all, he loved to study nature and to watch the habits of the beasts and the birds that made their abode in the fields and woods round about his home. How's my audio level, guys? Picture's good, audio's good? Just want to double check that before we get going too far. Let me know. Let me know. I just realized the shadow from the book where I have my lighting set up. I'll have to switch that next time I do this. Now, it chanced that, one sunny May morning, Thomas left his tower of Eckledorn and went wandering into the wood that lay about the Huntley Burn, a little stream that came rushing down the slopes of the Eldon hills. It was a lovely morning, fresh and bright and warm, and everything was so beautiful that it looked as if paradise might look. The tender leaves were bursting out of their sheaths, all covered in trees in a fresh, soft mantle of green, and amongst the carpet of moss under the young man's feet, yellow primroses and starry anemones were turning up their faces to the morning sky. The little birds were singing like to burst their throats, and hundreds of insects were flying backwards and forwards in the sunshine, while down by the burnside, the bright-eyed water rats were poking their noses out of their holes as if they knew that summer had gone and wanted to have a share in all that was going on. Page turn. Pass the caviar. That's right, buddy. Sounds good. Roger, roger. Good. Thomas felt so happy with the gladness of it all that he threw himself down at the root of a tree to watch the living things around him. As he was laying there, he heard the trampling of a horse's hooves as it forced its way through the bushes, and looking up, he saw the most beautiful lady that he had ever seen riding towards him on a grey palfrey. She wore a hunting dress of glistening silk, the color of fresh spring grass, and from her shoulders hung a velvet mantle, which matched the riding skirt exactly. Her yellow hair, like rippling gold, hung loosely around her shoulders, and on her head sparkled a diadem of precious stones, which flashed like fire in the sunlight. Her saddle was of pure ivory, and her saddle cloth of blood-red satin, while her saddle girths were of corded silk and stirrups of cut crystal. Her horse's hooves and reins were of meat and gold, and all hung with little silver bells, so that, as she rode along, she made a sound like fairy music. Apparently she was bent on the chase, for as she carried a hunting horn and sheaves of arrows, and she led 7 greyhounds along on a leash, while many scenting hounds ran loose at her horse's side. As she rode down the glen, she lilted a bit of an old Scotch song, and she carried herself with such a queenly air that her dress was so magnificent that Thomas was like to kneel by the side of the path and worship her, for he thought that she must be the Blessed Virgin herself. But when the rider came to where he was and understood his thoughts, she shook her head sadly. "I am not that blessed lady, as thou thinkest," she said. "Men call me queen, but it is of a far other country, for I am queen of fairyland, and not the queen of heaven." And certainly it seemed as if she said were true, for at that moment it was as if a spell were cast over Thomas, making him forget prudence and caution and common sense itself. For he knew that it was dangerous for mortals to meddle in the affairs of fairies, yet he was so entranced with the lady's beauty that he begged her to give him a kiss. And that is just what she wanted, for she knew that if she kissed him but just once, she had him in her power forever. And to the young man's horror, as soon as their lips had met, an awful change came over her, for her beautiful mantle and riding skirt of silk seemed to fade away, leaving her clad in a long grey garment, which was just the color of ashes. Her beauty seemed to fade away also as she grew old and wan, and worst of all, half of her abundant yellow hair went grey right before his very eyes. She saw the poor man's astonishment and terror, and she burst into a mocking laugh. Am I not so fair to look upon as I was at first?" she said. "But that matters little, for thou hast sold thyself, Thomas, to be my servant for 7 long years. For whoso kisseth the fairy queen must e'en go with her to fairyland, and serve her there until that time is past." When he heard those words, poor Thomas fell on his knees and begged for mercy, but mercy he could not obtain. The elfin queen only laughed in his face and brought her dapple grey palfrey close to where he was standing. No, she said, in answer to his entreaties. "Thou didst ask for the kiss, and thou must now pay the price. So dally no longer, but mount behind me, for it is full time that I was gone." So Thomas, with many a sigh and groan of terror, mounted behind her, and as soon as he had done so, she shook her bridle rein, and this grey steed galloped off. On and on they went, going swifter than the wind, till they left that land of the living behind, and came to the edge of a great desert, which stretched before them, dry and bare and desolate, to the edge of the far horizon. At least, so it seemed to the weary eyes of Thomas of Eckledorn, where he wondered if he and his strange companion had to cross this desert, and, if so, if there were any chance of reaching the other side of it alive. But the fairy queen suddenly tightened her rein, and the grey palfrey stopped short in its wild career. Now must thou descend to earth, Thomas, said the lady, glancing over her shoulder at the unhappy captive, and lout down, and lay thy head on my knee, and I will show you many hidden things, which cannot be seen by mortal eyes alone. So Thomas dismounted and louted down, and rested his head on the fairy's knee, and lo, as he looked once more over the desert, everything seemed changed. For he saw 3 roads leading across it now, which he had not noticed before, and each of these roads was different. One of them was broad and level and even, and it ran straight across the sand, so that no one who traveled by it could ever possibly lose their way. And the second road was different from the first as well as it could be. It was narrow and winding and long, and there was a thorn hedge on one side of it and a briar hedge on the other side. And those hedges grew high, and their branches were so wild and tangled that those who traveled along it, and that road specifically, would have some difficulty in persevering on their journey at all. And the third road was unlike any of the others. It was a bonny road, winding up the hillside among the brackens, the heather, the golden yellow winds, and it looked as if it would be a pleasant bit of traveling to pass that way. Now, said the fairy queen, and thou wilt, I shall tell thee where these roads lead to. The first road, as thou seest, is broad and even and easy, and there may be many who choose to travel upon it. But though it look like a good road, it leadeth to a bad end, and the folk that choose it repent their choice forever. And as for the narrow road, all hampered and hindered by thorns and briars, there be few that be troubled to ask where it goes. But did they ask, perchance more of them might be stirred upon the path to set upon it, for that is the road of righteousness. And though it be hard and irksome, it ended in a glorious city, which is called the city of the great king. And the third road, the bonny road, that runs among the brae and the friends, leadeth to no mortal kens whither, but ken where I leadeth, Thomas, for it leadeth unto fair Elfland, and that road take we. Man, sometimes it's hard to read this writing, but I'll make it work. And mark ye, Thomas, if thou hopest to shine or see thine tower of Ecclerdorn again, take care of thy tongue when we reach our journey's end, and speak no single word to anyone save me, for the mortal who opened his lips rashly in Fairyland must bide there forever. Then she bade him mount her palfrey again, and they rode on. The ferny road was not so bonny all the way as it had been at first, however, for they had not ridden along it very far when they led them into a narrow ravine, which seemed to go right under the earth, where there were no ray of light to guide them, where the very air was dank and heavy. There was a sound of rushing water everywhere, and at last the grey palfrey plunged right into it, and it crept up, cold and chill, first over Thomas's feet, then over his knees. His courage had been slowly ebbing ever since he had been parted from the daylight, but now he gave himself up for lost, for it seemed to him that certain that his strange companion and he would never come to their journey's end. He fell forward in a kind of swoon, and as if it had not been for that he held tight to the fairy's ash-gray gown, I warrant he would have fallen from his seat and had been drowned. But all things, be they good or bad, pass in time, and at last the darkness began to lighten, and the light grew stronger, until they were back in the broad sunshine. Then Thomas took courage and looked up, and lo, they were riding through a beautiful orchard where apples and pears and dates and figs and wineberries grew in abundance, and his tongue was parched and dry, and he felt so faint that he longed for some of the fruit to restore him. He stretched out his hand as if to pluck at some of it, but his companion turned in his saddle and forbade him. "There is nothing safe for thee to eat here," she said, "save an apple, which I will give thee presently. If thou touch aught else, thou art bound to remain in Fairyland forever." So poor Thomas had to restrain himself as best he could, and they rode slowly on until they came to a tiny tree covered in red apples. The fairy queen bent down, plucked one, and handed it to her companion. "This I can give thee," she said, "and I do so gladly, for the apples are the apples of truth, and whoso eateth them gaineth this award, that his lips shall never more be able to frame a lie." Thomas took the apple and ate it, and forevermore the grace of truth rested upon his lips, and that is why, even years later, men called him True Thomas. They had but a little way to go after this before they came in the sight of the magnificent castle standing on the hillside. "Yonder is my abode," said the queen, pointing to it proudly, there dwelleth my lord, and all the nobles of his court, and, as my lord hath an uncertain temper, and shows no liking for any strange gallant whom he sees in my company, I pray thee, both for thy sake and mine, to utter no word to any one who speaketh to thee, and if any one should ask me who thou art, I shall tell them that thou art dumb. So thou wilt pass unnoticed in the crowd. With these words, the lady raised her hunting horn, blew a loud, piercing blast, and as she did so, a marvelous change came over her, for her ugly ash-covered gown dropped off of her, and the gray in her hair vanished, and she appeared once more in the green riding skirt and mantle, and her face grew young and fair. And a wonderful change passed over Thomas also. For, as he chanced to glance downwards, he found that this rough country clothes had been transformed into a suit of fine brown cloth, and that on his feet he wore satin shoon. Immediately the sound of the horn rang out, and the doors of the castle flung open, and the king hurried out to meet the queen, accompanied by such a number of knights and ladies, minstrels, and page boys, that Thomas, who had slid down from the palfrey at this point, had no difficulty in obeying her wishes and passing into the castle unobserved. Everyone seemed glad that the queen was back again, and they crowded into the great hall in her train, and she spoke to them all graciously and allowed them to kiss her hand. Then she passed, with her husband, to the dais on the far end of the huge apartment, where 2 thrones stood, on which the royal pair seated themselves to watch the revels, which now began. Poor Thomas, meanwhile, stood far away at the other end of the hall, feeling lonely, yet fascinated by this extraordinary scene on which he was gazing. For although the fine ladies and courtiers and knights were dancing in one part of the hall, there were huntsmen coming and going in another part, carrying in grey antlered deer, which apparently they had killed in a chase, throwing them down in heaps upon the floor. And there were rows of cooks standing beside the dead animals, cutting them up into joints, bearing away those pieces of meat to be cooked. And although it looked to be a strange, fantastic scene, that Thomas took no heed of how time flew, but stood and gazed, never speaking a word to anyone. This went on for 3 long days. And then the queen stood from her throne, and stepping away from the dais, crossed the hall to where he was standing. "'Tis time to mount and ride, Thomas," she said, "if thou would ever see the castle of Ecgliadorn again." Thomas looked at her in amazement. "Thou speakest of 7 long years, lady," he exclaimed, "and I've been here but 3 days." The queen smiled. "Time passeth quickly in fairyland, my friend," she replied. "Thou thinkest that thou have been here but 3 days. 'Tis 7 years ago since we two met. And it is now time for thee to go. I would fain have thy presence with me longer, but I dare not, for thine own sake. For every 7th year an evil spirit comes down from the regions of darkness, and carries back with him one of our followers, whomsoever he chanceth to choose. And as thou art a goodly fellow, I fear he might choose you. So, as I would be loth to let harm befall thee, I will take thee back to thine own country this very night." Once more the grey palfrey was bought, and Thomas and the queen mounted it, and as they had come, so they returned to the eldern tree near the Huntly burn. Then the queen bade Thomas farewell, and as a parting gift, he asked her to give him something that would let people know that he had been really to the fairyland. "I have already given thee the gift of truth," she replied. "But I will now give thee the gifts of prophecy and poesy, so that thou wilt be able to foretell the future, and also write about it in wonderful verses. And, besides these unseen gifts, here is something that mortals can see with their own eyes, a harp that was fashioned by Fay in the fairyland. Fare thee well, my friend. Some day, perchance, I will return for thee again." With these words the lady vanished, and Thomas was left alone, feeling a little sorry, if truth must be told, at parting with such a radiant being and coming back once again into the ordinary haunts of men. After this he lived for many a long year in his castle of Lecliardorn, and the fame of his poetry and of his prophecies spread all over the country, so that people named him True Thomas and Thomas the Rhymer. I cannot write down for you, or read for you, all of the prophecies which Thomas uttered, all and which most surely came to pass, but I'll tell you 1 or 2. He foretold the battle of Bannockburn in these words: "The burn of Braid shall rin foul red," which came to pass on that terrible day when the waters of little Bannockburn was reddened by the blood of the defeated English. He also foretold the union of the crowns of England and Scotland under a prince who was the son of a French queen, yet bore the blood of a Bruce in his veins. A French quen shall batter the sun, shall rail all of Britain to the sea, ne'er to the ninth degree. Which a thing came true in 1603, when King James, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, became the monarch of both countries. 14 long years went by, and people were beginning to forget that Thomas the Rhymer had ever been in fairyland. But at last a day came when Scotland was at war once again with England, and the Scottish army was resting on the banks of the Tweed, not far from the Tower of Ecclerdorn. And the master of the tower determined to make a... let me make sure I didn't skip a page here. Yep. And the master of the tower determined to make a feast and invite all the nobles and barons who were leading the armies to sup with him. The feast was long remembered, for the Lord of Ecclerdorn took care that everything was as magnificent as it possibly could be, and when the meal was ended, he rose in his place, and taking his elfin harp, he sang to assembled guests song after song of days and days long ago. The guests listened breathlessly, for they felt that they could never hear such wonderful music again, and so it fell out. For that very night, after all the nobles had gone back to their tents, a soldier on guard saw in the moonlight a snow-white hart and hind moving slowly down the road that ran past the camp. There was something so unusual about the animals that he called to his officer to come look at them, and the officer called to his brother officers, and soon there was quite a crowd softly following the dumb creatures, who paced solemnly on, as if they were keeping time to music unheard by mortal ears. "'Tis something uncanny about this," said one soldier at last. "Let us send for Thomas of Ecclerdorn. Perchance he might be able to tell us if this is an omen or some such." "Aye, send for Thomas of Ecclerdorn," cried everyone at once. So a little page was sent in haste to the old tower to rouse the Rhymer from his slumbers. When he heard the boy's message, the seer's face grew grave and rapt. "'Tis a summons," he said softly. "A summons from the Queen of Fairyland, and I've waited long for it, and it hath come at last." And when he went out, instead of joining the little company of waiting men, he walked right up to the snow-white hart and the hind. And as soon as he reached them, they paused for a moment as if to greet him. Then all three moved slowly down the steep bank that sloped into the little river Leader, and disappeared into its foaming waters, for the stream was in full flood. And, although there was a careful search made, no trace of Thomas of Ecclerdorn was found, and to this day the country folk believe that the hart and the hind were messengers from the elfin queen, and that he went back to fairyland with them. We have a couple viewers left. So that's the story of Thomas the Truth Teller, and that's the very first story in the book. It's one of the oldest Scottish fairy tales I know. I'm a huge fan of it for a lot of reasons. I think I heard some noise over in Discord, so I wanted to pop in there and see if anybody was hanging out. Looks like it's Sarge and Ray. Hello. Thank you. So nice of you guys to join me. The wonderful thing about Scottish fairy tales that a lot of people don't know is that they're based in fact and fiction. Was there ever a Thomas Ecclerdorn? Probably. Did the things happen in 1603 that the story referenced? Absolutely. Queen Mary of Scots was, a lot of people know that phrase. Was the blood of a Bruce met with the royalty of France and the royalty of England, and it all became one? Yes, that happened. These are facts. Is it a fact that he went to Elfland? That's not for me to say. But the wonderful thing to remember here is that there's a lot of wonderful nuggets, and as we read more and more of these stories, and I've made a bit of a study of this, as we read more and more of these stories, we start to find all the points where they have commonality. And the whole business that time moves faster in Elfland is totally a thing. The use of the number 7 and the number 3 is extremely common across all the stories. In this case, he was told that he was going to spend 7 years with the queen, and he did. 7 human years, but only 3 elf days, because time apparently travels at a different rate in this elf land. The queen was on a hunting steed, and there's this concept of the Great Hunt. And the Great Hunt is a really big Scottish folklore piece where you don't go out at night because the Fae hunt at night. And whereas the story only referenced deer being brought in for feasting, if if the king was truly evil, and we'll get there. We'll talk about how the king transitions. If the king was truly evil, they would not be eating deer, they would be eating men. Um, the Fae, definitely Scottish Fae and German Fae in particular, are really unpleasant. Everybody likes to think of a fairy as colorful and wings and a mischief maker, but depending on time and region and things, the Fae can actually be little hellions. So in this particular case, the queen is out and she's hunting. We know she's hunting. She has the hunting dogs with her, and she has her bow and her arrows, and so she's out on the hunt. But she's not hunting what the knights and the king are hunting. She's hunting for somebody to save. Because the queen, unlike the king, has a heart. And so she comes across Thomas, someone who's enjoying nature and enjoys poetry and the finer things in life. And she decides to preserve him from being hunted by the Fae who are out on the great hunt. To do this, and the only way to do this, is to take him captive, to literally catch him so that the others don't. And so she takes him captive, and she takes him back as a servant so that he can participate in the events, because everybody participates. Now, whether you're at the table or on the table is something entirely different. So he gets to participate as opposed to participate. And so he's protected by the queen, and she looks after him and she makes sure he's safe. The other thing about Thomas the Truth Teller is, across a lot of Scottish fairy tales, if you ever want to establish the authenticity of the story you're telling, you interject Thomas. And you don't even need to call him Thomas the Rhymer. You don't even need to call him Thomas the Truth Teller. If you just make a simple reference to Thomas in your fairy tale, people assume that he's the queen's Thomas. And they assume that everything he says is truth. And by doing this, they lend an element of, I might be bullshitting you for this part, but this other part, Thomas himself said it, so it's not bullshit. This is honest to God, right? The Scots will embellish the shit out of something, but this part, you need to listen. This is where the important part is. And like most Scottish fairy tales, there's a story, yes, but there's also morals and things to be learned from it. And they focus on this yet again in the form of three. In this case, 3 paths through the desert. One's an easy path, one's a super hard path, and one's a super fun path, right? But to cross a super fun path, you have to be like with the Fae, because it requires magic to go that way. So you're left with either the hard way or the easy way. And taking the easy way, yeah, you get there, but it's going to end in misery. But if you take the hard way, there's reward in that. And so a very simple story about taking the path of least resistance versus doing the right thing, even though it's the hard thing, right? So there's a lot of really neat, valuable information in these folklores that can be gleaned from them. For the sake of tonight's stream, we're probably going to wrap it up there. I'm looking forward to reading a couple more of these stories for you guys. This one is pretty straightforward. We could dive into every single bit and piece of it, and we might come back to Thomas in the future after we do a couple more of these readings. I don't know that all these readings will be done from my apartment here. I really am looking forward to doing the readings from the boat as I originally intended, but I got tired of not actually doing them, so maybe we'll kick off from the apartment and transition out there in due time. With that said, we're at the tail end of our time here. I know that if we do have some folks left, they're probably itching to get over to the next thing that they have for their evening tonight, which is my friend streaming over at the Molotov Cocktail Hour, Chris Bowden. If you're looking for some additional entertainment, please, by all means, go check out what he has to say. He's usually talking about tech or something geeky. So swing over there and see what he's got going on. If you're hanging out with me still here, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you get notifications when I go live. Become part of the community. There's a link, linktr.ee/tipsyraven. If you click that, it should be in the description down below. You'll get the Discords, the Facebooks, the TikToks, the Instagrams, everything's. And you guys can check out all my content that we have there. And next time when I go live, you can actually participate in the live chat and be a part of the storytelling itself. Until then, I hope you all have a fantastic evening, and I will see you next time.